Make sure that you are promoting regularly your podcast on not just one channel, but multiple channels outside of the podcast platform. 43% of monthly podcast listeners are going to find out about a new show through social media.
On our emails that go out for our newsletter of our podcast, we get above 50% of people opening the email. And it's mind-blowing to see that people, 2023, are still opening emails, clicking links, responding. It's powerful. Don't neglect email and don't beat up on it too hard.
Welcome to Beyond the Mic. My name is Jethro Staggs, and this podcast is all about podcasting, content creation, and everything in between. I am joined by my co-host, Ryan Bowles, mentor, friend, favorite karaoke partner, and the host of the Good Grief podcast. How's it going today, Ryan?
Dude, super good. Thanks for having me back.
I'm glad you're back. Glad we're here for another episode. What are we talking about today?
Today's going to be all about how to promote your podcast regularly.
Oh, great topic. Very important one. We've talked about launch before. Batching was on the previous episode. Hey, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, look at it. It's all about batching, one of the best tools out there for content creation.
And then once you start creating the content, it becomes the next challenge of how do we put that podcast out to our listeners and make sure they know about it and others.
Absolutely. Yeah, not just current listeners, but also new listeners. And so podcast promotion is super important. Regular podcast promotion is super important as well. You know, I was just reading a stat that 43% of monthly podcast listeners are going to find out about a new show through social media.
No surprises there.
No surprises there. Social media is everywhere. It's the most pivotal tool in promotion. And so podcast promotion regularly is super important. We're going to talk about some of the methods that we use regularly, that you use on the Good Grief podcast, that I use regularly with my clients. And
I think before we do, I think the cool thing about how you promote your podcast is you can see the data as to how it plays out. So you can trial and experiment some of the things that we talk about today, and you'll see the line move or the views move or the comments or the likes or the listens on your podcast. So super practical episode. Where should we start?
Even just on that as well, another thing you can track as well, even Instagram's new feature where they tell you if someone started following you from a reel.
Super cool.
So we're going to be talking about reels and snippets, super important for podcasting. So one of the key things we're going to start off with is email newsletter. I know, going back to the basics, we're not going to go social media yet. We're going to go back to the dinosaur era of emails.
Now, don't beat up emails too much. It's still one of the main arenas that people open, read, and digest whatever the information is. In this case, we're talking about podcasts. And I can spit out some numbers from our giveaway campaign we talked about in one of the previous episodes. 90% of people open those emails.
That's crazy.
On our regular emails that go out for our newsletter of our podcast, we get above 50% of people opening the email. And it's mind-blowing because I've had multiple businesses, sent thousands of emails, hundreds of thousands of emails, and to see that people, 2023, are still opening emails, clicking links, responding, it's powerful. So don't neglect email and don't beat up on it too hard.
I'm not beating up on it. Hey, it works great for my clients. It's working great for you. So first thing, email newsletter. For you, when do you send out your email newsletter?
We send it out an hour after the podcast goes live, and that just makes sure we've got some buffer in case anything happens with it going live on YouTube, across Spotify, Apple, and the other platforms. And it's scheduled just an hour after that. So it's written in the days before with links all ready to go, and then it's sent.
But we probably can talk about in a future episode what makes a good email newsletter for episodes like this. I know for your episode it reads a bit more like a story. It's this really bite-sized, very simple sort of email newsletter. I know for other clients I work with, they like to have summaries, takeaways, a little bit about the guest. There's lots of different avenues and different ways that you can do an email newsletter, but most importantly, it's an important thing to do.
You got to send something.
You got to send something.
Build an email list and send something.
And make sure the links work to be able to make sure they can listen to your episode. Now, the second one, we're going to move into social media. Talked about it before, 43% is a big statistic. So people are obviously finding out about new episodes, new podcasts on social media.
I've found tons of podcasts, ones that are outside of our niche and space that I've come to love, and then also ones that are inside of our niche that are great to know about so we can listen in and hear what others are talking about. And so if it's happening to me, I know you've found podcasts from social media.
Absolutely.
it's massive. So you don't want to neglect it. So maybe we can talk about some of the more details around different platforms, whether it's Instagram, is it Facebook, is it TikTok, YouTube,
Yeah.
and then what makes people find those things.
Yeah, well, I reckon we start off with Reels, because I think this is the one that really applies to my own personal experience. Obviously, I help clients with creating snippets and Reels from their own episodes, but I'm going to give a shout out to the podcast We Got the Chocolates. It is my favorite podcast to listen to. It's a comedy one. They release an episode on a Thursday, so usually I'm driving down to the Gold Coast on the weekend so I can listen to it en route. But I found out about that podcast because of Instagram. And
So
for
good.
ages, I would only consume their Reels and not listen to their podcast. So I was always on the short
Interesting.
form.
How many
game.
Reels did it take you before you
It
thought,
took me a while, and then I was like, I should actually listen to a full episode. And now I just listen to the full episodes because I'm like, oh, it's all these Reels mixed into one, obviously.
and so it probably goes to show, hey, maybe the first or the fifth or the 10th reel might not bring about a subscriber, but it pays off.
Absolutely. It's the consistency. It's just being front of mind. Giving people little teasers, little things about the episodes,
Totally.
and having a variety of different types of reels. So we can probably speak a bit onto your own podcast
Sure.
here. I know something you guys do is when on launch date is you post a reel that is actually the little bit of the trailer, the coming up on this podcast that happens at the beginning of your podcast, and you guys post that up as a reel. Why do you do that?
Yeah, it's an intro. It gives you an insight into what's coming up on the episode. And hopefully there's something in that 30 or 60 seconds that grabs someone's attention to go, I'm curious about that thing, therefore I'll go and search it out and listen. So that happens on day one.
Yep.
And maybe before we get into, we're talking about some of the details here. Depending on what your cadence is, I think that's important to note as well. So ours is a weekly podcast cadence. Therefore, we're not posting 100 reels in that time. We've got 3 or 4 reels that happen in a 7-day period before the next episode.
Yep.
So maybe others that have podcasts that are bi-weekly, you've got a bit more space to maybe post 6, 7, 9 reels. So it depends on your cadence. But yeah, first day is intro.
Yep.
And then 2 or 3 other reels following that point before the next episode are more specific topics and singular focused conversations that happen that might draw someone in for a longer listen before they go and find the podcast.
Yeah, awesome. There's so much power in Reels. And obviously, we're using the word Reels, which is Instagram, but you can do it on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. Obviously, we're just talking about short-form content and the snippets of each episode.
And if you go back and listen to the batching episode on Beyond the Mic, you can take this concept and make one reel that goes across 4 different platforms, and now you're leveraging your time even more.
Yeah.
The reel's important. That's what social media are pushing hard still at the moment, but also the hashtags are important among those posts as well. So it's great to note that you should build a hashtag library of between 10 to 20 hashtags around your field so that with each reel, they're getting maximum reach to current and new audience.
Yeah. Yep, that is, absolutely fantastic. Hashtags are important, Reels are important. It's all about shareable content, I think, is really important. I was looking at a post the other day that ranks what you should do in terms of interacting with a post to get the most engagement out of it. And sharing it is, I think, at the top one. So trying to create content that is shareable is a really impactful thing. What else is involved? So we got Reels, stories. I'm going to plug Ryan's podcast here as an example of this. Just today, I was looking on Instagram, I saw a story and he was talking about a different topic. And at the end of the story, he's like, oh, maybe we should talk about this on a future episode, but here's what we spoke about on this week's episode. And I just thought it was the most perfect segue. And it wasn't a snippet. It was just you in your
just talking to my phone.
Talking to your phone.
Casual, no lights set up or microphones or anything like that. It was just a real life scenario that I thought this could be something that we talk about in future episodes, drew the listener in, and then related it back to this week's episode. And with stories, you can use links to direct people straight to your podcast, which is just amazing. You can also engage them by using polls and question stickers and different features that Instagram have to interact with your audience. And when you draw them in, then you can give them the next step, which is, hey, why don't you take a listen? Why don't you dive in a little bit deeper and come with us?
Yeah, I think those interactive elements on Instagram is super important. Even the quiz feature, starting to quiz people, oh, what did we say in this part of the episode?
And little side tip, when people interact with those features on your stories, Instagram pushes it out to more people. So we can see we're getting into the details, but we can see when people interact, those stories get way more views. So Instagram likes that interaction.
Yep, that's awesome. So gone over email newsletter, we've gone over reels, snippets, stories, using interactive elements, etc. Another option is if you have a text message list. So maybe you don't just have an email newsletter. Maybe
you got phone numbers.
You got phone numbers. Texting out to people and just try different things. Try different phrases, different words, and use, like Ryan said at the beginning, you have the analytics in front of you to be able to see what's working and see the direct correlation between what you send out and your viewers and engagement on the actual episode.
Now, if we take a bit of a segue, we've also got a Facebook group attached to our podcast and what we're doing there. And so if listeners do have a Facebook group, it's a great way to notify everyone inside of there. And you can use a feature inside where you can tag everybody in the group. So it's a great way to notify everyone about that episode. And if you don't have a Facebook group, maybe there are people in your space that have groups that allow promotion, or it's something that just might help the audience. So you could promote your podcast within other groups.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to promote. It's all about doing it regularly as well. Even back to the snippet side, I work with clients that have, fortnightly or monthly or weekly episode cadence. And it's also not just about promoting your current episode. It's about promoting previous episodes.
Totally.
So something that, because you don't want people fatigued by seeing the same sort of content, especially if you're interviewing a guest. So I see this a lot, is that there's like 7 reels about that one guest posted in a short amount of time. And it's just a lot. So maybe posting 1 or 2 at the beginning, then leaving a break and then going back to them in a month or 2 months' time.
And I think you're right. We move on so quickly from the content we've posted and we don't repurpose it.
Yeah.
So if you've got content and reels out there already, you might be able to pause the episode right now. I'm sorry. I'm telling listeners to pause it.
Back, though.
Yeah, make sure you come back, pause the episode, and just go back through your most popular reels or posts that have the most likes and saves and sends. You can check that stuff on Instagram and repost it.
Do not be afraid to repost it.
Literally repost it. Just change maybe the copy that's involved and you're done. Now you've just leveraged your time, repurposed content, and all of the new people that have started following you are seeing something for the first time that they've missed in the months gone by.
Exactly, because it's not just about the current audience, it's also about the new audience, and that's, I think a really important realization to have. So I think we've pretty much covered a lot of the key reasons why you should do it, how to do it. We went to a bit of the nitty gritty. Make sure that you are posting, promoting regularly your podcast on not just one channel, but multiple channels outside of the podcast platform. Because hopefully if people subscribe to your podcast, they'll get a notification on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But these are just extra touch points to make sure people are engaged. They're not missing out on the great content you have.
Yeah, you don't want to rely on those subscription notifications because they're also going to be subscribed to other people's as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, dude, this has been a juicy episode.
I think it's been great. I think we've provided great value. Hey, if you enjoyed the value on this episode, why don't you leave us a review or send it to someone? Let someone know, hey, I watched this episode and I really enjoyed it. Well, that's another episode of Beyond the Mic done, and we hope to see you on the next episode.